Let's talk about this right here. This is the MEGADAP ETZ21 Plus Pro. Well, not the Plus, this is the ETZ21 Pro. And it's basically an adapter for converting Sony E-mount lenses like this Sigma 24-70 over here to Nikon Z-mount, so you can use your E-mount lenses no problem with the Nikon Z-mount. Now, I bought this because everyone recommends it over the Viltrox since its autofocus is supposedly better than the Viltrox. And that is true. Having tested someone else's Viltrox, this autofocus is better, particularly in video, than the Viltrox. However, there is something to look out for with regards to this and possibly the new ETZ21 Plus. Now, the main difference between this and that apparently is not performance, but rather the fact that the 21 Plus has weather sealing. So if you're taking this out in the wild, you might be shooting it in slightly wet or sandy conditions. That is a bit of a safer bet. But the main reason I'm having an issue with this adapter is that it broke after using a particularly heavy lens. If you look at this adapter, it makes sense, right? This is just a very thin piece of metal because the difference in flange distance between Sony and Nikon is like 3 mm or 4 mm. And so this thing only can really be that thick. And it's really simple. It's just some pins and an adapter chip as well as the Nikon Z pins on the back. That's all it does. And it's got pretty solid firmware to do pretty good autofocus conversion. However, the issue is that because it's such a thin piece of metal and a thin piece of plastic behind it holding all the pins, what ends up happening is that when you use particularly heavy lens and you're not the most gentle with it, or you place your camera down for long periods of time, this deforms. So I started having connection issues about 3 weeks into using my ETZ21 Plus. I used it with a very, very heavy lens, the Samyang 35-150, which is big, chunky, and heavy. It looks great, it works great, but I started having incessant connectivity issues where it seemed like the lens would just disconnect and autofocus would stop working. It would basically be easily fixed if I just kind of turn the lens like this and then return it back and reconnect it, but that gets annoying and it's not good if it stops in the middle of a recording, and it has happened before. By the way, I'm just shooting this video on iPhone with a low mic because I want to make it a honest, raw, personal opinion on things that I've just been using day to day, just a pure honest review. If you want to see some of the work that I've been working on with this particular rig, I'll link it down below. It's not the best, but it is my camera that I've been learning very aggressively on. But the ETZ21 Plus, right, it started to deform, I think, because what solved this issue was basically bending the little piece of plastic at the bottom back forwards that holds the pins, and that would basically reduce the connection issues for a few weeks. But after a few weeks of use, those issues would return, and that is a major concern. I mean, obviously we're adapting lenses here, so the experience was never going to be perfect, but this is a very real thing that you have to keep in mind. I'm not sure if this is actually better on the Viltrox or the new 21 Plus Pro. I can't verify that, but this is something that you have to be aware of. And because I can't really trust this to be extremely reliable, I'm actually switching from this system to basically just go and buy a set of Nikon Z lenses as well for when I really need reliable autofocus. Because if I was just changing aperture and I was relying on manual focus, then this being inconsistent is not a major deal. However, if I was relying on this to have good autofocus for can't miss moments when I'm shooting, then I can't trust it, which is not great. So as a result, I'm actually selling this and selling my ETZ adapter to just go and buy a set of Nikon 24-70 f2.8. I'm going to buy the first gen S model rather than the Mark II, because the Mark II is 3,000 plus Singapore dollars, which is very expensive. But the first gen can be had for about 1.5, 1.6, 1.7k Singapore dollars, which is only a little bit more than the cost of this Sigma. And yeah, maybe the image quality won't be quite as good as this Sigma, but it's still really, really good, and it will have reliable autofocus and weather sealing, which is more important to me because I'm going to be using this to shoot a documentary when I go on a trip in Iloilo, Philippines in May, and I want a system that I can trust and rely on. But yes, the ETZ21 Plus Pro, especially because you're going to be placing your camera down on the table a lot, and the lens might, be pushing up against the adapter, which might mop, when the weight goes like this, it might warp the adapter. Just be aware that this might happen, and the fix might be to just bend the plastic back. And that's, it's just another thing that I want to point out before you readily go and adapt all your Sony E-mount lenses with the ETZ and just switch over to the Nikon system like I did. Another thing that could possibly prevent this, though I don't really have any verifiable info on it, is to place the camera on the side or only put it on a tripod. some sort of proper system for holding it up instead of placing it down on the table like that with the lens, because that's what we filmmakers do. We always place it down on the table like this, right? And that might press on the adapter and warp it. And I think that's actually the cause of this issue. Hope that was helpful in your purchase decision for the ETZ21 Pro.